contributed to the control or fixing the Chernobyl. Kaya lang, including Russia, medyo delikado attacking Ukraine. You know, gaya ng sa itong ginagawa Chernobyl, Ukraine, tayo, itong ginagawa ng leak Russia. And so there was this actually yung wheat, mabutit na lang all nations contributed to the control niyan is Ukraine or fixing the Chernobyl, lahat ng including Russia, mga renal, which is now attacking Ukraine. Hihina ito because itong ginagawa ng economy ng magsegue tayo, itong ginagawa ng tayo is actually yung wheat, which is the primary gumagamit ng mga sakyan Ukraine. You complain every day that mga renal getting higher everything by hina ito because may slowdown ng economy ng buong mundo. Ang gasolina natin crudo tayo magmahal kasi wala tayo. We are gumagamit ng mga sakyan. The source of complain every day that sa labas wala tayong atin. It's getting higher by the hour. Itong lament, langis. Gusto kong ang gasolina natin crudo magmahal kasi Malaysia wala tayo may oil. We are importing not really in abundance but source oil of energy that could at least meet the challenges. Wala tayong atin. You know, dito sa baba yung mga sakyan, public conveyances, mga train, ang Brunei meron. Oil that could at least meet the challenges dito sa baba yung mga sakyan, public conveyances, mga train, ang Brunei meron but it's slowly drying up according to the experts. Sabi ng King ng Brunei, kaya sila sparing ang ano nila, ang paggamit. For as long as there is this crisis, there will be no new normal. It's going to be a hard climb for everybody. Hindi lang tayo. At yung magtataka kayo, maintindihan ninyo, sabihin ko sa inyo, nagmamahal yung langis. Because always it is the law of supply and demand. Maraming demand, ang supply wala kasi naputol. So kung saan natin kunin yung next fuel natin, I really do not, I cannot speculate. Palabas na ako. And ayaw ko kung how to solve the problem. You have to solve the war between Ukraine and Russia before we can talk of even returning to normalcy. Sa pagka ngayon, it's a bleak picture because mukhang ayaw pa ni Putin hintuan yung gera at yung nakaawa kasi ako naman kaibigan ko si Putin for the way they're handling the war. Every day, pati yung mga civilian, binubomba na nila. You know, ako, I would ask Putin to hear me because President Putin, magkaibigan ko man siya, you are in control of everything. Anyway, you really started the rokos there na higpitan mo ang mga sundalo mo. Nagwawala killing soldiers. Walang problema yan. Kaya nga may army para pang-away talaga to fight in case there is a war. which is really the reality now, it's not a special military operation. Ginamit ni Putin yung word na yan. But actually, it is really waging a war against a nation, a sovereign nation. Pati ang tayo nasasaktan na dahil nakikita natin pati civilian, anak ng pati yung mga bata. Hindi, you don't, yung kanyon mo, wag mong itutok doon sa residential. So yung embassy ng Russia kung nakikinig, I am not picking a quarrel with anybody. I said Putin is a friend of mine. But alam mo, pag nagpunta ka ng, it is your moral obligation to see to it na the civilians, the innocent ones, children, the elderly, mga babae, pati yung vulnerable masyado sila at hindi sila marunong magtago. Nandyan lang sa bahay nila. Maybe they just lock the door and pray to God that it will be a passing episode sa buhay nila. Namamatay. At yung libingan nila, yung tinatapon na lang, i-dig the ground, tapos doon na lang mass grave. Pati sundalo, pati na ihalo na yung mga matanda, pati yung mga sundalo na Russia na patay, tinatapon na rin nila kasi the decay is ever present. Ganun ang mangyari. Ako, nasasaktan lang ako sa mga inosente talaga. Maraming nagsasabi na barihado kami ni Putin, papatay. Alam mo, gusto ko lang malaman ninyong Pilipino na pumapatay talaga ako. Sinabi ko yan sa inyo noon pa. Pero ang pinapatay ko, kriminal. Hindi ako pumapatay ng bata o matanda. Magkaiba ang mundo namin yung nangyayari ngayon sa Russia pati sa Amerika. I just want to air my sentiment, and I'm sure also the sentiment of everybody here, baski na nandito si Secretary Lorenzana, Secretary nyo coming from the military, alam ko na kung sila rin pasalitain mo, hindi nila gusto yung ganon. Kaya i-control mo. Pagka nagbitaw ka ng ganon na klase, kailangan you have to control na ikaw talaga ang susunod. Pinakauna dyan is protect the innocent, the civilians, na wala namang talagang kamuwang-muwang sa gera na yan. Yun lang ang kung narinig sana ako ng Russian embassy, sabihin nila doon kay Putin na nagsalita yung kaibigan mo si paalis na pagka-presidente pero humihirit pa rin in the name of humanity. Wala akong dyan, except that hindi natin practice yan. It's not the mode that we wage a war na ganun ang nangyayari. It's evolving and still ganun pa rin. Dapat pumasok na si Putin. Huwag ninyong galawin. Or at least kung may mga civilians, sabihin niyo, give them a warning to vacate the place where they are so that they can go to safer grounds. Hindi lang tira ka ng tira dyan. Mahirap yan. I am not condemning President Putin. I am just sharing my sentiment, which is also the sentiment of every human being na nandito sa kwartong ito. Na it's not the way how to fight a war. Finally, pumunta ako doon sa postal corporation office. Binalik nila yung post office, which is really the correct. Kasi bang magpunta ka sa anong lugar, it's always called post office. There were changes far and wide in between the years. Pero tama ito. Ginawa nilang modernization of post office. Online sila lahat. I have to ask them maybe in the next kung meron pang naiwan ng panahon para sa akin to talk to the people and ask them itong post office to explain to the public. Online na sila lahat. The digital era has dawned upon our maganda ang ginawa nila. So, dapat panoorin ninyo. May clip man dyan, i-run mo para ito yung postal na dyan ako bumilib. Mga bago na. If I may mention it, Suzuki na yan. Medyo matibay ng konti. Yan online ang lahat. Pati pagbayad mo. Kagaya ng style ngayon. Ayan, no? Ako ang hindi marunong yan. Yun ang maganda. Bigyan ka ng ID. Ang dali. So, wala nang kutso-kutso yung transaction mo kung magpunta ka doon. Mas minus na ang human intervention. Electronic na lahat eh. Ito yung mga bagong mga opisyal natin. Mga sundalo. Snappy. Ang una niya kasi maglakad daw ako Sabi ko, pagdating dyan sa gitna, patay na ako. Pag natumba ako, yun na yun. Ito mga sundalo natin, ito hindi itong susunod sa disiplinado talaga ito. 4 years na diploma. Valedictorian nila, babae. Pardon. Alam mo, sa totoo lang, sa buhay ko, kaya ito marami ito mga kasalanan mga violation ng rules and regulation. Kasi 4 years yan, meron yan silang penalty. Only the president can in clemency. Nakapagtatawa kasi 2 klase ng clemency lang ang pinipirmahan ko. Yung sa Bilibid Prison, pati itong sa Philippine Military Academy. Yan ang si Mr. Ko sa Sari-Sari Store. Pure Gold is a big corporation. So, bago ako patuloy, merong tayong mga bisita dito. Si Undersecretary Abdullah Dumama ng DOH nandyan. Magbigay siya ng konting update maya. We have Secretary Dison, National Vaccination Program. Si Secretary Anyo ng DILG. The same yung niya, related report sa vaccination, health protocols, tapos yung violation, and the drug scene ng Pilipinas. Nandito si Secretary Borge, wala naman. May ka? He would report on the Climate Change Commission. Ang ating mga ibang nandito ngayon, mga opisyal, si Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdia, Senator Bongo, Secretary Lorenzana, Secretary Andanar, at may special guest tayo dito, si Miss Mitch Kahayon Oy, Congressman-elect Caloocan City, District 2, former Executive Director ng Council for the Welfare of Children. Andito si Mitch. Niyaya namin na makinig o may gusto kang sabihin. Pwede ka mag-speech dito, widow mo lang. Pasalamat sa tao. Kasi ito si Mitch, leader ko talaga ito na tumutulong sa akin since day one na 2016 election. And day one, she joined me sa journey ko sa presidency. So, we would start with Secretary Abdullah Dumama. Updates on COVID-19 situation, monkeypox Putang ina, pati yung mga unggoy ito nakikialam ni asa atin. In non-endemic countries and the upcoming DOH immunization activities. Secretary Dumama, you have the floor. I will just mag-interrupt lang ako to make some clarification as we go along. Go ahead.
Hello. Yes. A'udzubillahiminasyaitonirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Magandang gabi po, mahal na Pangulo, Mayor, sa ating pong kagalang-galang na Senador Bongo, ating pong mga kagalang-galang na membro ng gabinete, Congresswoman mates, sa lahat po ng ating mga kababayan nakikinig. Sa ngalan po ni Secretary Francisco T. Duque III, sa pagkakataon po ito, ako ay mag-uulat ukol sa pinakabagong updates para sa ating COVID-19 response at iba pang paalaala mula po sa Department of Health. Next slide, please. Nito pong nakalipas na Mayo 17 hanggang 23, 2022, ay may naidagdag na 1,247 bagong kaso o katumbas po nito is about 178 na kaso kada araw. Bahagyang mas mataas po ito kumpara sa naitalang kaso para sa May 10 to 16, 2022 na 1,085 lamang at may 155 daily cases. Sa araw po na ito, tayo ay may karagdagang 191 cases. So 1,247 na karagdagang kaso sa linggong ito, ang datos po ay nasa loob ng light green na box sa gawing kanan. Sa NCR po, meron pong nagmula po doon 512. Sa Region 4A, 182. Sa Region 3 ay may 128 po. At yung mga 425 ay sa mga natitirang mga rehiyon. Meron po tayong 14 na naidagdag na severe and critical case sa Talaan. Ang current cumulative case fatality rate naman po natin ay medyo mababa na nasa 1.64%. Nakapagtala naman po tayo ng 1,652 recoveries para sa linggong ito. Sa kabuuan po, 98.30 na po ang pambansang cumulative recovery rate. Ang ating pong national 7-day average positivity rate naman sa kasalukuyan ay nasa 1.1% lamang po. Nitong May 16 hanggang May 22 po. Ang habang ang ating pong RT-PCR testing output ay kasalukuyang nasa 21,160 na po kada araw. At panghuli po para sa ating utilization rates, national utilization rates, nasa 17% po ang ating non-ICU bed utilization rate, habang 15.1% po ang ICU bed utilization rate natin. Out of the 5,586 po na total COVID-19 admission at the national level, 12% pa lamang po ang mga ito ay 12% lamang po sa mga ito ay severe at critical admissions. Next slide, please. Nakapagtala rin po tayo sa linggong ito ng about 178 average daily cases ayon sa onset ng symptoms. Mas mataas po ito ng 15% sa ating average na 155 cases per day noong May 10 to 16. Sa NCR naman po, nakapagtala din tayo ng 73 average daily cases ngayon sa onset, ayon sa onset ng symptoms po sa linggong ito. Mas mataas ito ng 16% kumpara sa ating average na 64 cases per day noong May 10 to 16. So sa nakikita po nating pagtaas ng kaso, mahal na Pangulo, Mayor, kami ay muling nagpapaalala na palaging sumunod sa ating minimum public health standards. Palagian po nating pagsuot ng mask, panatilihin po ang wastong ventilation, agarang mag-isolate kapag may naramdamang simptomas, at magpabakuna na po ang hindi pa nakatanggap ng primary dose series. At magpa-booster naman po once kayo ay eligible na. Next slide, please. Para na po sa ating case trends, nananatili po ang Pilipinas at karamihan sa ating mga regions sa minimal risk case classification. 6 na region po medyo nasa low risk classification, Ito po yung mga regions 3, 5, 8, 12, Caraga at Barm. Ito po ay dulot ng positive growth rates sa nagdaang 2 linggo. Samantala po, iniobserbahan natin yung mga region na nakapagtala ng positive rate sa loob ng huling 1 week, 7 araw. Kasama po rito ay yung NCR, regions 1, 2, 3, 4A, 4B, 5, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12 at Caraga. Mapansin po, 6 and 10 lamang po ang hindi umangat ng kaso. Sa kabila nito, nanatiling nasa low risk ang average daily attack rate po natin. Ang healthcare utilization rates ng buong bansa po at lahat ng mga region. Next slide please. Katulad ng ating pagpapanatili ng low risk healthcare utilization rate sa buong bansa, nasa 668 pa lamang po ang kabuuang severe at critical COVID-19 admissions, habang ang karamihan ay mild at moderate lamang ang health status. Bahagyang may tumaas po ito ng konti kumpara nung nakaraang linggo na 625 reported cases. Para naman po sa ating death o mortalities, patuloy na bumababa ang ating naitalang COVID-19 deaths at the national level. Nitong ikatlong araw itong ikatlong linggo ng Mayo po, 16 po ang naitala nating nasawi. Next slide. Nitong nakaraang linggo, na-detect natin sa ating bansa ang ating unang kaso ng Omicron sub-variant BA4 po mula sa isang returning overseas Filipino galing Qatar. Patuloy na binabantayan ng ating Epidemiological Bureau at Regional Epidemiology and Surveillance Unit ang kaso. Huling napag-alaman ko po, naka-recover na po ito at ang kaniyang mga close contacts. Ang BA4 po ay tinuturing na variant of concern ng European Center for Disease Prevention and Control dahil po sa katangian nitong higher transmissibility and posibleng pag-evade sa immune protection. Gayunpaman, wala pa pong patunay na ang variant na ito ay makakapagdulot ng mas malubhang simptomas. Magkaasa po tayo na patuloy ang DOH sa pagpapaalala sa publiko na magpabakuna na po. At yung hindi pa po lalong-lalo na po yung mga hindi pa nakatanggap o nakakompleto ng kanilang primary series. At kung kailangan ng booster para sa mga eligible, magpa-booster na po tayo. Gayon din po yung paalala na mariing sumunod sa minimum public health standards. Next slide please. Ito na po yung sinasabi niyo, mahal na Pangulo, Mayor. Nitong nakaraang linggo, Mr. President, lumalaganap ang balita ukol sa monkeypox. No? Ang monkeypox ay kabilang sa orthopox virus genus kung saan kabilang rin dito ang smallpox. Isa itong re-emerging disease na nagmula sa tropical rainforest sa West and Central Africa. Next slide please. Next slide. Andiyan na tayo. Yan. Ay, hindi. Balik niyo po. Yan. Ang unang kaso po ng monkeypox sa tao po ay naitala noong 1970 sa isang 7 years old na batang lalaki mula sa Democratic Republic of Congo. Ang monkeypox po ay isang zoonotic disease. Ang ibig sabihin po nito, nagmula po ito sa mga hayop. Bagaman hindi pa natutukoy ang natural reservoir nito, karaniwan pong natutukoy ito sa mga rodents at primates, ibig sabihin niya mga daga. Bilang isang zoonotic disease, pwede po itong maipasa, una, human to human. Kung human to human, it's through droplets, body fluids, or infected skin na may crack, o contaminated clothing or linen. Ang ikalawa pong route of transmission ay animal to human. Pwede pong kagat o bite ng human o scratches, animal to human, raw or minimally processed wild meat o contaminated materials. Karaniwang simptomas po ng monkeypox ay ang pagkakaroon ng lagnat, rashes at pamamaga ng lymph nodes, yung pong mga kulakulani. Maihantulad ito sa simptomas ng smallpox, maliban sa swollen lymph nodes, ngunit ito po ay sa kabutihang palad, medyo less contagious at less severe po. Kasalukuyang 12 bansa na po ang may pinakabagong mga kaso ng monkeypox. Kabilang dito ay 9 na bansa sa Europa, pati rin sa Estados Unidos, Canada at Australia. Dahil dito po ang Department of Health ay pinaigting pinaigting po ng Department of Health katuwang ng ibang national agencies ang ating 4-door strategy. Ating pagtitibayin ang screening process sa ating mga borders upang maiwasan ang pagpasok ng monkeypox sa bansa. Atin din pong hinihimok ang mahigpit na pagsunod sa ating minimum public health standards. Ito na naman po, isa na namang next slide please. Ito po, Mr. President, mahal na Pangulo, Mayor, panahon na naman po ng tag-ulan. Medyo dahan-dahan na pong tumataas ang kaso sa mga ilang bahagi ng Pilipinas. So pagdating po ng tag-ulan, rainy season na naman, nagpapaalala po yung ating kagawaran ng kalusugan na sundin ang ating 4S upang magsugpo ang dengue. Ano po yun? 1, search and destroy po. Ito po yung maaring i-destroy natin yung mga maaaring pamahayan ng lamok sa pamamagitan ng pagtaob sa mga kagamitang maaring pag-ipunan ng tubig at pag-intlugan ng lamok katulad ng mga balde, ng mga palanggana na hindi ginagamit, paglinis po ng alulod sa ating mga bahay, at yung mga lumang gulong ng sasakyan na nakatambak lamang. Pangalawa po, self-protection. Ito ay pamamagitan ng pagsuot ng damit na may mahabang manggas o pantalon o maaring paggamit po ng insect repellent is recommended. Number 3, seek early consultation sa unang simptomas pa lang po lamang ng sakit katulad ng pananakit ng tiyan, tuloy-tuloy na pagsusuka, pagdurugo ng gilagid o ilong, dugo sa suka at sa dumi, pamamaga ng atay, pagkapagod o pagkabalisa, dapat ho kumonsulta na tayo sa pinakamalapit na health center at doktor. Pang-apat po ay support, fogging and spraying sa mga lugar lamang na may pagtaas ng kaso ng dengue. Kasabay po sa next slide please. Kasabay po sa pagsunod ng 4S ay sabay din natin yung 4 o'clock habit na pagpapanamatiling malinis yung ating bahay sa kapaligiran at kapaligiran para maiwasan po ang pagdami ng lamok. Ito po yung slide na sinasabi ko po sa inyo kanina, mahal na Pangulo, Mayor. Ang Chikiting Vaccination Day ay inilunsad upang mahibagi natin ang mga bakuna para sa mga bata na 2 taon pababa. Ang goal po natin dito ay mapagkunahan ang at least 80% of the remaining approximately 1.1 million infants who missed their routine immunization last 2021. Ang mga bakunang po ito ay yung BCG vaccine, hepatitis B vaccine, pentavalent vaccine, oral polio vaccine, inactivated polio vaccine, pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, at measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. Noong pong April po, mahal na Pangulo, Mayor, ay ginanap sa priority provinces about 36 areas na may mahigit na 10,000 bata na hindi pa nakakumpleto ng bakuna. Ngayong May 26 to 27 po, ay isasagawa na po natin ito sa buong bansa. Nasubok na po natin na 4 na dekada ang pagiging ligtas at epektibo ng ating mga bakuna. Dumaan na po ito sa masusing pagsusuri ng WHO at ng ating Food and Drug Administration. At pumasa naman po ito sa ating tinalagang standards o pamantayan. At higit sa lahat po, mahal na Pangulo, dapat samantalahin po natin ng mga kababayan natin ito dahil ito po ay libre. Kaya naman po para sa mga nanay, tatay, mga guardians, gaya ng lolo at lola at iba pa, suportahan po natin yung Chikiting Vaccination Days upang bigyan proteksyon ng ating mga anak laban sa vaccine-preventable diseases. Next slide, please. Sa kabuuan, mahal na Pangulo, mahal na Mayor, ang Pilipinas at karamihan sa rehiyon ay nananatiling nasa minimal risk habang ang Regions 3, 5, 8, 12, Encaraga and BARM ay nasa low risk classification po. Ang naitalang bahaging pagtaas ng mga kaso ay hindi po naka-apekto sa ating health utilization rate. Maging sa mga region po at sa buong bansa, at ito po ay nananatiling nasa low risk utilization rate. Sa pagpasok po ng BA4 sub-variant sa bansa, inuudyukan po natin yung ating mga kababayan, ang publiko, na kumplituhin ang inyong COVID-19 primary series o magpa-booster na po upang lumakas po ang ating immune system at labanan ng anumang variant ng COVID-19 na darating sa hinaharap kung meron po. Para naman po sa monkeypox, ang DOH kasama ng iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno ay nagtutulungan po upang maiwasan ang pagpasok nito sa bansa. Pinapaalalahanan natin ang ating mga kababayan na laging sumunod sa minimum public health standards. At sa huli po, mahal na Pangulo, hinihikayat din namin ang lahat ng mga magulang na suportahan yung ating sinasagawang chikiting vaccination sa darating na Huwebes at Biyernes, May 26 to 27, at pabakunahan na po natin yung mga chikiting natin laban sa mga vaccine-preventable disease. Maraming salamat po, mahal na Pangulo, yun lang lamang po.
Thank you. It's a good presentation. May itanong na ako. Itong monkeypox, this is not a virulent virus, yung nakakamatay.
Meron din pong fatality rate na at least 1% lamang po. Hindi naman ho ito ganong ka-virulent at hindi rin nagbibigay ng malalang sakit, mahal na Pangulo.
Sana huwag kasi na patay lahat ng unggoy dito pagka ganun. Mass execution. Secretary Dizon sa vaccination program.
Good evening.
Yung ulitin ko lang yung sa yung importante dito sa yung topic ni Abdullah is yung yung vaccination ng yung 2 years pababa bata, dapat pabukuna na ninyo. Totoo, basta protection yung bakuna natin, parang hindi gagana yung mga, because if you would only look at it intensely, yung from COVID-19, we have had so many mutations. Nag-iiba ang anyo nitong, nag-i-spread siya, ibang, ewan ko ito mga gagong virus na ito. Ngayon, pati yung unggoy na, mabutit na lang, wala masyadong, except for the pets, hindi naman masyadong marami. So yan lang yung less than 2 years or less, magpabakuna na ninyo para yung mga bata ninyo may protection. At least sa lahat ng mutants dyan, kung tatamaan ka man may bagong variant, hindi masyado matindi kasi nandyan na yung bakuna, may protection ka na. Iyon ang gusto kong pumasok sa ulo ng mga pabakunahan mo na anak mo. Anak ninyo yan eh. So, huwag ka sanang makaproblema dyan sa anak mo. Siguraduhin mo na lang na magkabakuna patapos may protection. Araw-araw, yung original nag-mutate eh. But siguro, yung mother nila, yung COVID-19, kaya pagkabakunado ka, medyo may protection ka. huwag ninyong kalimutan, ulitin ko yung mga magulang. I'm appealing to the parents of children 12 and below. Maaga masyado ito, pababa. 1 year old plus, bakuna na para ang protection nandiyan na. So, yun. Punta na tayo kay Secretary Dizon.
Good evening, Mayor, Mr. President. Magandang gabi po sa ating mga kababayan. On behalf of Secretary Charlie Galvez, I would like to present a very brief report on the status of the vaccination program. As you know, Mayor, tinamaan po ng COVID si Secretary Galvez, kasama po ng kanyang pamilya, and he and his family are in our prayers for his swift recovery. Pero awa po ng Diyos, mild naman po ang kanyang simptomas. Kailangan lang po magpagaling ng ilang araw. But
Yan
I think
gusto natin sabihin, si Secretary Galvez, yung kingpin talaga sa vaccination, siya yung kuha ng lahat ng bakuna. Nung wala na siyang makuha, ang nakuha niya, COVID na. Pero I hope that he's well and bakunado naman siya, wala problema. Go ahead.
Opo, and I think it serves as a reminder, Mayor, to all of us that COVID is still there.
Yeah.
And as you said, marami pong mutation, pero talagang importante talaga, bakunado. Kasi kung bakunado ka, and boosted ka kung ikaw ay eligible na. Dahil ito talaga ang magsasalba sa'yo. Kasi kung hindi ka bakunado, medyo, alam po ng Yusek Dumamayan, medyo delikado talaga kapag tinamaan ang mga hindi bakunado. So with that po, Mayor, I'd just like to quickly go through the updates. Next slide, please. Kagaya po ng sinabi ni Yusek Dumama kanina, down to 2,200 cases, active cases na lang po tayo. If I am not mistaken, Mr. President, this is one of the lowest active cases in the world, no, for a country. No, isa po ito sa pinakamababang dami ng mga aktibong COVID cases sa buong mundo. At nakikita naman po natin sa iba't ibang bansa sa Asia, sa iba't ibang bansa, pati sa Amerika, pati sa Europe, tumataas pa rin ang mga numbers dahil nga dito sa mga bagong variant na mas nakakahawa. Pero dito po sa atin, despite many mass events because of the recently concluded and successful national election, the observance of Ramadan, the Lenten season, and obviously the full opening of our economy na talaga pong malaking tulong sa ating mga kababayan, lalo na sa mga kababayan nating nagtatrabaho pang araw-araw. Despite all of this, we have been able to successfully keep our cases down. And a huge part of this is really the extent of our vaccination program. Next slide, please. Very quickly lang po, ito lang po ang rundown ng active cases. Nakikita po natin, pababa na po talaga ng pababa. 2,200 na lang. Next slide, please. Kagaya po ng sinabi kanina, despite the many election-related cases, we did not see a significant spike in the number of cases. And it is, I think, a testament to not only the government's efforts at pushing the vaccines, but also the willingness and the cooperation of our countrymen and women sa pagsunod po sa ating minimum health standards, lalo na po yung pagsusuot ng mask. Next slide, please. Ngayon naman po, ang pinagkakaabalan po namin lahat sa IETF at sa National Task Force sa pamumuno ni Secretary Lorenzana, Secretary Anyo, Secretary Galvez at Secretary Duque ay hinahanda na po natin ang transition para po maayos po ang maipapasa natin sa susunod na administrasyon at para po maitutuloy po nila ang ating mga gains nitong mga nakaraang buwan, lalong-lalo na sa ating vaccination program. Important lang po to note, the priorities that we have now are, number one, to really increase the vaccination levels of some of our provinces, as I will show later, especially in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, kung saan lampas lang po ng 50% ang ating vaccination rate. It is the lowest in the country. Kaya po sa mga darating na linggo, magkakaroon po tayo ng mga special vaccination days sa BARM, especially po ngayon na natapos na po ang Ramadan nung nakaraang mga linggo. We are also already going to start the aggressively pushing the boosters for 18 years old and above. Ngayon po pinayagan na po ng ating mga experts ang boosters para ang second booster para sa ating mga senior citizens at sa ating healthcare workers at para dun po sa mga merong comorbidities. And kagaya po ng sinabi mo kanina, Mr. President, napaka-importante po nating proteksyonan ang ating mga bata. Lalo na po ngayon na marami sa kanila ay pumapasok na sa eskwela. Marami po sa kanila ang hindi bakunado. That's why we are really pushing for this, and we would like to reiterate your call earlier, Mayor, to the parents. Kasi yung magulang po talaga ang susi dyan. They are the key to push and to allow their children to be vaccinated post-haste. Next slide, please. Ito po ang ating numbers ngayon. Maganda po ang ating numero. With at least one dose, we are already almost 82% of the target population. For fully vaccinated individuals, we are already at close to 77% of our target population. Actually, na-reach na po natin ang target po natin talaga nung una, Mr. President, before your term ends, ay umabot po tayo ng 70% ng ating eligible population. We are very happy to report, Mayor, na as of today, 77% na po tayo, na-exceed na po natin yung inyong target na binigay kay Secretary Galvez at sa buong IATF. Ngayon po, ang challenge natin ay talagang magpa-booster po yung mga nakatanggap na ng 2 doses at ma-vaccinate natin ang ating mga bata, ang ating mga kabataan. Next slide, please. So, 81 out of 119 provinces, highly urbanized cities, and independent component cities have already reached above 70% of vaccinating their target population and above 70% of their senior citizens. Napakalaki po ito. Pero as you can see, Mayor, and ito po ay sinabi na rin ni Secretary Anyo nung tinawag po niya ang pansin ng ating mga probinsya at mga LGU, dahil meron pa rin pong mga probinsya. Sa probinsya po, only 45 out of 81 provinces, or roughly 56% of our provinces, have reached the 70-70 target, 70 of target population and 70 of seniors. Sa ating highly urbanized cities, isa na lang po ang hindi umaabot. Yun po ay ang General Santos City sa Socsargen. Pero tinutulungan po natin si Mayor Rivera at ang kanyang team para po umabot siya sa target na ito. At meron na lang pong isa out of the 5 independent component cities, Cotabato City in Region 12, ang hindi pa po umaabot. So tinutulungan po natin ang Gensan at ang Cotabato City at yung ibang mga probinsya para umabot po sila. Meron po tayong 2 probinsya na nakaabot sa target ngayong linggo. Yun po ay ang Sorsogon Province sa Bicol at ang Davao Oriental sa Region 11. Finally po, Mr. President, you will be happy to note na if we look at po our major cities, next slide please, at ikukumpara natin halimbawa sa mga ibang syudad, halimbawa sa Amerika, ang NCR po, ang kanyang total vaccination ay actually lumampas po ng 107%. Baka po magtaka kayo kung bakit nangyari ito. Dahil po ang NCR mayors, dahil po sa tulong ng DILG, ng MMDA at ng ating mga mayors sa NCR, nagbakunan din po sila ng mga non-NCR residents sa Bulacan, sa Cavite, Laguna, Rizal, at sa iba pang mga probinsya. Dahil alam naman po natin, Mayor, na marami pong mga taga-probinsya ang nagpupunta sa Metro Manila para magtrabaho. So, binakunahan din po ng NCR yung mga residente ng ibang probinsya. Kaya po lumalampas siya ng ganyan. Pero kung titingnan po natin ang Cebu, 87.45%, Davao City, 85.38%, mas mataas pa po tayo sa mga ilang mga magagaking syudad sa Amerika tulad ng Los Angeles, New York, at pati na rin ng London sa United Kingdom. So it's really a testament po to the hard work of our mayors, of the national government, and also the private sector na naabot po natin itong mga milestones na ito. Yun nga po, doon po nagtatapos ang aming report, Mr. President. Maraming salamat po sa iyong constant reminders sa ating mga kababayan na magpabakuna at tuloy-tuloy lang po ang pagmamask dahil yung dalawang po yun talaga ang ating ultimate protection against COVID-19. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Secretary Dizon. We will have Secretary Anyo to do the reporting.
Please put the slide. Magandang gabi po, Mr. President, ES Salvador Villadea, and Senator Bongo. Mga kapwa ko lingkod bayan, mga kababayan, magandang gabi po. Next slide. Katulad po sa ating programa ng pagbabakuna, ay binigyan po natin ng direktiba ang ating mga local government units para po mag-house-to-house vaccination. At ngayong gabi ay magbibigay po ako ng ulat ng ating accomplishments sa house-to-house vaccination ng mga LGUs. Narito po ang datos mula sa ating mga masisigasig at masisipag na kawani ng lokal na pamahalaan patungkol na ginagawa nilang house-to-house COVID-19 vaccinations. Patuloy ang pagtaas ng bilang ng nababakunahan at sinusuportahan natin ang inisyatibong ito ng LGUs sa buong Pilipinas upang masigurado natin hindi na muling makakaranas ng surge ang ating bansa. As of May 22, 811 cities and municipalities ang kasalukuyan nagpapatupad ng house-to-house vaccination. At makikita po dito sa ulat natin na nakapag-administer na po ng 1,934,807 doses sa tulong ng ating lokal na pamahalaan. Sa ngayon po makikita natin ay binibigyan natin ng komendasyon ang Region 13 na umabot sa 477,657. Sumunod ang Region 3 sa 421,138 at ang Region 11 na umabot naman po sa 246,249. Pinasasalamatan po natin ang lahat ng LGU officials at personnel sa kanilang pakikiisa sa ating nationwide vaccination campaign. At ngayong napapalapit na ang banta ng Omicron BA.4 variant sa bansa, muli tayo nagpalabas ng direktiba upang suyurin ang bawat komunidad, sityo at kanayunan para mabakunahan ang ating mga kababayang hindi pa rin nakakatanggap o nakakakumpleto ng kanilang COVID-19 vaccines. Next slide. Dito naman po sa ating community health recorded violations, mula po May 11 hanggang May 22, makikita po natin na tumaas ang violation ng not wearing of face mask. Umabot sa 40,335, pati na rin ang no physical distancing na umabot ng 2,180. Kaya naman muli nating pinapaalalahanan natin mga kababayan, sumunod tayo sa minimum public health standards, lalong-lalo na ang pagsusuot ng mask. At sisigutin po natin na ating i-implement ito sa lahat ng antas, sa lahat ng area sa buong Pilipinas. Next slide. Sa ating mga pong regular na pag-uulat ng ating kampanya against illegal drugs, sa patuloy na programa ng PNP, ng PIDEA, NBI at AFP at ibang pang ahensya ng pamahalang nasyonal sa pagsugpo ng illegal na droga, makita po natin na sa loob po ng nakarang araw mula May 11 hanggang May 22, nakapagsagawa tayo ng 1,556 operations. Ang ating pong naaresto ay 1,796. wala naman pong naiulat na nasawi sa naturang operasyon. Pero makikita po natin na tumaas na naman o lumaki ang halaga ng shabu at marijuana na ating nakumpiska. Umaabot po sa 295 million pesos or 295,969,774 pesos. Almost 0.3 billion po sa loob lamang ng 10 araw. Patuloy pa rin natin paitingin ang ating anti-illegal drug operation sa buong bansa. Yan lamang po at magandang gabi, Mr. President.
Okay. I think it's the last speaker for tonight would be Secretary Borge. Empleyado siya noon ng Malacanang, ngayon sa Climate Change Commission na siya. So sa report niya kung ano ba itong alam mo, Secretary Robert, yung ito bang climate change conferences and all, yung mga lahat ng mga experts, scientists nagsasabi na it's because of the indiscriminate maybe use of the fossil fuel and yung footprints ng itong well, yung carbon nasa baba natin. Has this been addressed really thoroughly and with some with a kind of a mandatory requirement for us to do our share of fighting climate change?
Maraming salamat po, Pangulong Duterte. Totoo po, ito nire-recognize na anthropogenic activities or human activities contribute to climate change. At na-recognize na rin po na kailangan gumawa ng lahat ng pamahalaan ng mundo upang ma-address ito. Ngayon, ito po ay nagagawa sa pamamagitan po ng ating negotiations, including the Paris Agreement, that's through the nationally determined contributions. And dito po sa larang ito, Mr. President, you will be glad to know that the Philippines set an ambitious 75% commitment para mapababa ang ating carbon footprint. But under your guidance, sir, it's a very smart move because about 72% are dependent on the commitment of other developed countries to help developing countries like the Philippines. So, binibigay natin sa kanila ang responsibilidad na tulungan ang developing countries because, as you said, Mr. President, we are only a negligible contributor to greenhouse gas emissions at 0.5%. Karamihan na ito ay dulot ng developed world and they have to take responsibility for this.
You know, unless the industrialized countries would really help with all their might and commit to reduce the carbon emissions, medyo wala tayong mano dyan eh. America is not a member of this commission. Paano ba ito? Because unless they come to their senses actually, they cannot expect the smaller nations with the least emissions, carbon emissions, na pipilitin nila na sumunod tapos sila ayaw. That has always been the equation between the rich and poor nations, between the industrialized countries and those that are lagging behind. So, yan ang that is really what's wrong with itong unless they come up with sanctions. But that is very hard to do. Unless may mga sanctions kasi medyo mahirap yung mapasunod. But this commitment of ours to reduce our emissions by 70%, hanggang what's the timeline?
Thank you, Mr. President. If I may also, this is why, Mr. President, it's important for us to continue with the clarion call which you made. Essentially, it's climate justice to those who are least responsible for climate change, to those with the least resources, to those who are most vulnerable and at risk. We need to do more. And when we say we need to do more, it's really on the part of the developed nations because they have been largely responsible for greenhouse gas emissions, which is the object when it comes to climate change mitigation. Ang developing nations, Mr. President, nasa climate change adaptation tayo. We are on the receiving end. And in our report, you will find, Mr. President, how hard we have been working along with the international community to raise this issue. You have given us proper guidance to make sure that developed countries need to do their part po.
Well, kagaya ng it's always the small guy that suffers. The poorer nations, kagaya nandito na tayo sa level na yan, or the category that we find ourselves in today at present time. Just like itong, if I may go back to the strife between Russia and Ukraine, I don't think that it's really Ukraine that's fighting the war now. It's really NATO, the Western ally. It's almost a NATO fight. Ginagamit lang yung tao, but yung mga armaments are really the state-of-the-art weapons of the participating nations. Germany, may mga iba. But overall, it's the poorer nations that really suffer. Climate change, tapos you disrupt the normal flow of supplies around the world. Number one is oil. You play a little game there, and little do they realize na it's the smaller nations that really suffer from this war going on in Europe. It's always the poor nations eventually who will suffer. Climate change, ganun rin. The least contributor sa carbon emissions. But when there's a calamity, tayo, especially countries that's kagaya natin, it's the first country facing the Pacific, tayo ang mauna. So, ganun ang prayer ko. Kailangan they should participate with all their commitment really to do their thing. Kasi kung ang ginagawa ng walang sanctions at all, ang ginagawa ng mga mayayaman and industrialized countries heavily they just pay a lip service, nothing more. That climate change commission is a moribund body. Unless there is a sanction or a commitment that's an ironclad, maybe motivated by their desire to improve the situation dito sa mundong ito, then we can see maybe an improvement overall in terms of weather, in terms of pollution, lahat na. But again, itong equation na ito is never changing. When the big countries, industrial countries, begin to ignore their moral duty and just go ahead and progress by leaps and bounds dito sa kailangan ng those that are needed by the world for a normal pace. Oras na disrupt yan, kaya ng mga kababayan natin, hindi nila alam yan. They do not really realize the impact, the challenges that we face itong sa ano ngayon. Because it's oil and everything. And the trade and commerce, yung exports natin, meron tayong napapabili sa kanila eh. But things cease to move when there is itong may mga mayaman na ewan ko ba? Pero that is really what is, that's the lamentations of the poor. Kaya mahirap talaga na it's very hard to be poor, to be less than the others.
If I may, Mr. President, importante po yung sinabi ninyo, participation and cooperation and good faith. Kung kaya po, Climate Change Commission, its mandate to really work with our partners in the international community to also not just shed a light, but really to hold accountable the developed countries for what it's done and what it needs to do. Kung kaya po, you've given me the opportunity to meet with the Prime Minister of Japan, who was committed to, I think, 100 billion yen in assistance to Asian Pacific countries when it comes to water management. I was able to speak with former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, and he reflects and mirrors your position, Mr. President, na kailangan talaga may aksyon, and it's not just commitment. So if I may, Mr. President, if I can proceed with the report, I'd be most honored po.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po, Pangulong Duterte, sa pagkakataong ito na makapag-ulat ang Climate Change Commission ng isang legacy report ng Duterte administration tungkol sa climate change o nagbabagong klima. At the outset, we have to recognize that climate change is real. Ito po'y totoo at ito'y nangyayari ngayon. Ito po'y banta sa ating buhay. Climate change is an existential threat. Now, we have, our experts have said that in the IPCC, that there will be certain global impacts if we're unable to manage the increase of the temperature of the world by 1.5 degrees centigrade. Ito po, Mr. President, ang maaring mangyari. Destruction of coral reefs, species loss and extinction, lower harvest for staple foods, especially in Southeast Asia, increased threats to basic human needs, more frequent droughts and drier seasons, heavier rainfall, and stronger typhoons. In the context of the Philippines, ano po ang top 10 climate-induced risks sa ating bansa? Ito po ay naayon sa ating National Panel of Technical Experts. Rising sea levels, tataas ang ating mga tubig. Coastal erosion, flooding, increasing frequency and severity of tropical cyclones, typhoons, extreme drought, temperature increase and rising urban heat index, extreme rainfall, climate-influenced diseases, including zoonotic diseases, changing wind patterns, and today, biodiversity loss. Ano po ang epekto nito? Ang next slide po ay magpapakita ng epekto in a very real way how typhoons affect our people. Ito po sa Surigao, Mr. President. Surigao.
Yung Odette ba to?
Yes. Can we stop? Totoo po, Mr. President, kalunos-lunos ang nangyayari sa ating bansa at sa ating mga tao. Sa Climate Change Commission, sinasabi namin, buhay at kabuhayan ng tao ang nakataya. Ano pang epekto sa Pilipinas? Our economic growth is hindered. Bumabagal po ang ating paglago bilang ekonomiya dahil sa climate change, dahil sa dami ng disasters na dapat nating minamanage. In the past decade, we lost 506.1 billion pesos due to climate change hazards and geological hazards. That's about US $10 billion. Ano pa po? Climate change threatens food security. Ang ating mga farmers ay apektado ang kanilang mga ani, dahil dito, tataas ang presyo ng ating mga pangunahing bilihin. Typhoon Odette damages for agriculture are estimated at Philippine pesos 17.7 billion pesos. Ano pa po? Along with the Pacific Small Island Developing States or PSIDS, ang Pilipinas bilang archipelago, we risk losing our coastlines and entire islands. Sa ibang bansa, coastlines, metro ang pinag-uusapan. Sa ating bansa, ito'y coastlines, hindi lang coastlines, kung hindi buong isla. That's about 167,000 hectares of seashore land on 171 coastal towns in 10 provinces. Ano pa po? Dahil sa climate change at nababagong klima, ang mga tao natin are forced to migrate. At karamihan po dito, 80% ay kababaihan. What have we done, Mr. President, under your administration? You serve as the chairperson of the Climate Change Commission, and you have given directions clear so that we will be able to address the impacts of climate change.
Robert,
Yes, sir.
if I may ask, is there any meeting between now until the end of my term, in between, is there any meeting or convention or something?
Yes, Mr. President.
Ako na ang pupunta doon. Hindi, talaga. Ano ba talaga gusto ninyo? Kasi ako, itapon ko yung lahat ng basura sa dagat. Hindi na ako mag-landfill. Bakit? Kung ganun kayo, tapos lip service lang nga, you do not really honor commitments insofar as the changing of the climate itong sa planet na ito. Kung if they maintain their attitude towards this challenging huge task, taon-taon tayong babasagin dito sa ano. No, if kung mag-ano sila, I said the start to reduce the carbon footprint sa ano nila, hindi gawin nila. Kung hindi, magpunta ako doon, sabihin ko sa meeting, kung may meeting man, ako na ang magpunta saan? Sa Geneva?
There are two meetings right now na nakaambang, Mr. President. Una ay sa Stockholm, Sweden. That's Stockholm plus 50. Ang mga ministers po ng mundo ay pupunta doon. Pagkatapos ay ang Bonn, which is the intercessional meeting, SB 56, which is the lead up to COP27. Nagaganapin naman po sa Sharm el-Sheikh.
Where is the other side? Sweden
and then Bonn, Germany, and then COP27 will be in October in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, Mr. President. It's important
man doon sa gira, baka hindi na tayo makabalik.
Let me just, if I may, Mr. President, during the Asia-Pacific Water Summit, the 4th Asia-Pacific Water Summit in Japan, you did give a very strong message on challenging people, challenging governments, that business-as-usual approach cannot prosper and must not be countenanced. Dahil nga po, we are experiencing a climate emergency. And we will continue to do that po, whether in Stockholm or in Bonn, Germany, if not even with a stronger sense of urgency and stronger language, para po malaman ng mga tao na talagang importante at talagang we hold to account those who are most responsible for climate change.
I'm not trying to be funny, but can you raise hell in the next meeting?
We will do everything that we can, Mr. President, given your mandate to us, to really raise not just the clarion call, but to give all our stakeholders and should be partners a realization that this cannot happen any further.
Kasi kung malipat ko lang itong bagyo, ibigay ko ito sa Amerika, pati sa Europe. But the problem is, wala tayong magawa. It's the poor guy that really suffers.
Yeah.
Tayo, yes.
Just to follow up your statement na lip service lang yung ginagawa ng mga developed countries. Yung pinaka-importante agreement, sir, yung Paris Agreement, di ba, Robert? Ngayon, nung presidente si President Trump, in June 1, 2017, he announced that the US would cease or stop all participation in the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change mitigation. So wala na yung US dun sa Paris. Abang ko lang kung ibabalik ni Biden.
He said na ibabalik niya po.
Ibabalik niya. Pero ito yung mga ginagawa ng developed countries that they pay lip service to the climate change problem.
If I may also, sir, there was a disturbing report recently in a UK paper that developed countries are actually investing in oil exploration, traditional fossil fuels. And this is an affront to what we're doing, the global effort to really mitigate the effects and the impacts of climate change. And we will be very frank, Mr. President, when we are in Stockholm and when we are in Bonn, we will be very frank and we will tell them what needs to be heard. You've taught us, Mr. President, never to be afraid if you are in the right, if you feel that you are working for the greater interest, not just of the country, but really of the entire world. And truly, the voice of the developing world must be heard, and we are committed to do that at the Climate Change Commission, Mr. President.
Well, what is happening is that they see the damage, and as an atonement maybe for their failure to help planet Earth, ano lang na, magpabigay sila ng mga aid in dollars, 85,000. We don't need that. What we need is your positive agreement to, or a positive commitment to improve yung carbon emissions lang nila. Because we are facing the Pacific. The warming there, tumataas na yun. Mainit na ang tubig sa Pacific Rim. Ngayon, pagdating ng it's melting, and the ice in both Arctic pati Antarctic are melting, and so ang tubig lumalaki up to the point when there is really a boiling hot Pacific Ocean. Then pagdating ng ng malamig, that is where the typhoon is yan ang gestation ng sitwasyon natin. Pagbalik mo doon, you bang putang ina ninyo, ano ba? Is there a chance for us to agree? Or there is a chance for you to face the sanction if you do not? Because kaming the poorer nations really suffer much. Ang Pilipinas, because yung Pacific Ocean, doon it's boiling there because of the temperature, it's getting hot. Then, pagdating itong malamig, then it starts to, boil, and it graduates into a typhoon. Alam ba ka ng mga gagong yan? Alam ba nila? Hindi.
Alam po, dahil ito po ay nakapaloob sa IPCC report po ng United Nations.
Sampalin mo na lang.
And always po, we will do as you have directed, Mr. President, in Stockholm and in Bonn, Germany. And we will make sure that our voice, not just as the Philippines, but as part of the developing world and part of the island developing states, that our concerns should be heard, and not just heard, but acted on.
Sabi ko sa iyo kung pwede lang, kasi at the end of my term na, I should have decided to go there in one of your meetings. at magbigay ako ng lecture sa lahat. The way you are doing it, you are punishing actually the poor nation. They can withstand yung mga buildings nila. But tayo, karami nating mga squatters, kita mo naman ang atip nila, plastic. Kung hindi, yung mga billboards na discarded, then they make a makeshift tapos pagdating ng bagyo, yun. Wala kasing sanksyon eh. If you really want compliance about anything in this planet, you have to have sanctions for violations. Or, no, there are rules, and if you do not follow the rules, then the consequences are there. But who gets the most suffering? It's us. Yung mahirap.
If I may, Mr. President, it's a very revolutionary idea. Sanctions are employed against states that do not follow norms of international law.
Unless there is sanctions, walang mangyari dito. Just like America has withdrawn from all the agreements regarding climate change, gusto nating gumanti rin, wala man tayong magawa. And we are nearing to a disaster because what's happening there is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. It is already a war between NATO by proxy ang Ukraine against Russia. Yan ang nangyayari dyan. Now, things get really worse. We might have a third world war. I hope it would be limited to a tactical weapons use and not yung pagka pinindot nila yung the red button, therefore they go nuclear. Malas lang tayo. Pero mabuti yan, tabla-tabla na tayong lahat. Now we can really say, at last, God has made us equals because we're going to hell. Everyone was.
If I may, sir, just to briefly go through your legacy, what we have done. Number one, we've demonstrated strong political will for pro-environment initiatives. These include the closing of Boracay, and then undertaking the comprehensive Manila Bay Rehabilitation Program, and making sure there's a moratorium on new coal-fire-powered plants. Next, we've operationalized National Greenhouse Gas Inventory. Ito po just for monitoring and evaluation para malaman natin at ma-generate ang data and track yung emission po natin. Essential para makapag-desisyon tayo at magbigay ng polisiya. Kasama din po dito ang pag-ratifika ng Paris Agreement on Climate Change. Next, we have come up with the first nationally determined contribution. Again, 75%, more ambitious than the rest, but still smart because the majority, more than 70%, are conditioned on the assistance to be provided by developed countries. And we're saying, Mr. President, na hindi tayo nanghihingi ng dole-out, hindi tayo namamalimos. What we're asking for is a responsible partnership because we are least responsible for climate change. Next, under your administration, you formulated climate policies such as the National Climate Risk Management Framework na gagamitin ng iba't ibang ahensya para po to increase the resiliency and our climate change adaptation and mitigation measures. Kasama din po dito, Mr. President, pag-advocate natin ng relevant laws. Dito po, kasama ang RA 11201 ng DSUD, Housing that Considers Climate Change. Sabi po ng ating DSUD, ang mga bahay po na ginagawa ngayon ay kinoconstruct para it withstand the challenges of climate change towards resilient communities. Ang RA 11285 din po, ang Energy Efficiency Act ay nagbibigay ng insentibo para sa mga energy conservation efforts. These are steps in the right direction. We've also opened access to international climate finance, like through the Green Climate Fund. Mr. President, pinapunta po ninyo ako ng Korea at kinausap ko po ang Green Climate Fund. Una po, sabi ko sa kanila, I want to discuss bakit nahihirapan ang Pilipinas. When they came to the presentation, Mr. President, they said they'd like to apologize because they've discovered two areas in which there are gaps within Green Climate Fund. Sila na po mismo ang nag-identify ng kanilang kamalian at gagawin po nila ang lahat para po makorek po ito, Mr. President. Next, we have scaled up domestic public budget and investments in climate change. Under your presidency po, the National Climate Public Budget, just from 2019 to 2022, it increased from 199 billion pesos to 282 billion pesos in 2022. Ito po ay nakalodge sa iba't ibang ahensya ng pamahalaan. From 25 national government agencies in 2020, we now have 145 participating in our climate change expenditure tag compliance. Para po malaman natin, Mr. President, ang ginagawa na gastos at ito po'y na-account po ng ating pamahalaan. Kasama din po dito ang pag-empower sa ating local governments through capacity building and technical support. Ang Communities for Resilience Program or CORE ay nagaganap na sa 1,167 LGUs. At ngayon po ay kasama ng 124 state universities and colleges. And nagpapasalamat po kami sa DILG, Mr. President, dahil sila ay partner namin para talagang maibigay sa LGU ang kaalaman tungkol sa climate change. Mr. President, under your administration also, we've strengthened climate resilience through adaptation and mitigation interventions. Kasama na rin dito ang local indigenous knowledge. Ginagamit natin ang kaalaman ng ating indigenous peoples para matutunan natin ang best practices sa climate change adaptation. Kasama din po ang pag-monitor at evaluate ng mainstreaming ng climate change programs natin sa iba't ibang sangay ng pamahalaan. Now, Mr. President, what do we need to do since we are in the final days of this administration? Ito po, kung inyong mamarapatin, ang recommendation ng Climate Change Commission. In the transition to green development and a low-carbon economy, we need to pursue concrete actions. We want to take a three-pronged approach: policy, programs and projects, and promotions. When we say promotions po, it's really information and education. Bakit? Dahil ang kaalaman po ng climate change ay medyo mababaw pa. We would have to be very honest. Kailangan po alam ng lahat hanggang sa barangay kung ano ang climate change at anong impact nito at bakit importanteng malaman ito dahil buhay at kabuhayan ang nakasalalay. Kailangan po, Mr. President, we have to change the paradigm. Focus firmly for the present and the future. And ang sinasabi po nila, build back better. Ang sinasabi po natin, more than build back better, we must build right at first sight. When you say build back better, ibig po sabihin nito, may isang kalamidad pa na kailangang experience. We no longer want calamities and disasters to be experienced. Kailangan po, we build right at first sight. Ito po, Mr. President, are our recommendations: inform and enhance access to climate information, embed climate information for policy coherence, gamit po ang ICT. Yan po ay website ng Climate Change Commission kung saan nakikita ang National Integrated Climate Change Database and Information Exchange System. Kailangan din po mag-issue ng relevant policies on impact valuation of climate change and disasters at suportahan ang mga pending bills para ma-increase ang ating kaalaman at ating kakayanan para makombat ang climate change. Push, Mr. President, for policies to increase renewable energy share in the energy mix. Right now, in the 2020 Philippine Energy Plan, the renewable energy accounts for 19.29% of the total primary energy supply. We may need to do more. Next, develop local science and technology for climate change adaptation and mitigation. By doing this, Mr. President, hindi po tayo aasa sa iba't ibang bansa para tayo magkaroon ng ating kakayanan para sa climate change adaptation and mitigation. And then, mobilize the People's Survival Fund for local climate adaptation solutions. 1 billion pesos po ito, Mr. President. Right now, the utility rate is 31%. Gusto ho namin iakyat ito para sa 100% para magamit na ho ng ating mga LGUs. And speaking of LGUs, we will engage LGUs to be more active with the assistance of our National Panel of Technical Experts and state colleges and universities, and increase information and communication hanggang sa barangay level, hindi lang po sa local government. And then, finally, Mr. President, foster multi-stakeholder partnerships for climate investments and finance. Katulad nga ho nito, meeting po namin with former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and he agreed and committed to help open pathways for financing for the Philippines. And ito po yung punto ninyo, Mr. President, stronger voice in climate negotiations, especially in climate justice. Ito po ay picture ng inyong speech nung kayo nag-deliver nito sa 4th Asia-Pacific Water Summit in Kumamoto, Japan. Of course, we have to pursue the generation of green jobs and quicker transition to a greener economy. And on a micro level, para sa mga tao po, kahit tayo po ay nag-iisa, may maiaambag tayo. So accelerate climate change adaptation and mitigation initiatives through use of climate-resilient crops, proper solid waste management, conduct of massive reforestation, promotion of active mobility, and harnessing renewable energy, among others, through a whole-of-government and whole-of-society approach. Masasabi rin namin, Mr. President, to close, the building blocks are there for a climate-resilient Philippines. The framework and plan of actions are in place, and the recommendations have been made. You may consider, Mr. President, that you have set up the next administration to succeed, not to fail. You've set it up to succeed because we know, Mr. President, at your heart and at the very core of your administration, all you want is for the entire Philippines, our dear nation, to succeed. Maraming salamat po. Daghang salamat.
Alam mo, Robert, we will continue really to suffer itong climate change insofar as the Philippines is concerned. Kasi tayo, until now, ang kinakailangan natin na para umandar yung mga factories, coal, most of lahat coal, kukunti lang yung connect with yung mga planta sa energy nila doon sa power. Yung iba, coal talaga ang ginagamit. But have you been to Villanueva? I think it's...
Yes, sir.
have you been to the factory na...
Yes, sir.
Kung masunodan sana ng mga factories yan, ganun, ever conscious of their duty to help the country. It's using coal, but they have added so many layers of cleaning the exhaust. Wala ka namang makita na wala ka makita na you do not see any doon. Except that, nandoon ka ba? They have this aviary. Beside the plant is an aviary. Kasi yun ang nila sa pollution. Meron doong vegetation at may mga ibon. At the first to suffer yung pollution o sobrang pollution, yung nila is the aviary. It's not really much actually. They continue to use coal, but somehow they have they made up for something that's really very almost deadly sa I hope we can transition to nuclear na pag-usapan. The next administration might want to just start the ball rolling and just baski i-discuss na because we have to educate so many people. And the fact that we are fighting an insurgency, yan ang problema. You cannot have a nuclear plant somewhere there without the ever-present vandalism for destruction itong mga NPA. Alam ko, ayaw nila yan. They pretend to be knowledgeable in everything so that nagre-resist sila ng mga ganon. And yet, they have nothing to show to the public, to the people of the Philippines, except the destruction and the killing that they have perpetrated over the years. Ganon yan. So, wala naman sigurong you are the last. Maybe next meeting we can make the story complete by yung mga projects na ginawa natin for the country. Not really for the next kanila, yung bahala na rin sila sa panahon nila. But yung ano lang nagawa natin. But yung ang kabako, because noon, million lang yung Cebu. Now, they're importing, the biggest haul was how much, sir?
11 billion. 1.6 tons.
Puta na tinulada. They should be able to kill the drug lords without mercy. Kaya human rights na yan. Hindi makatulong sa bayan natin yan. They are just, itong human rights, all that they can do really is posturing. Hanggang dyan lang yan sila. They cannot help the country. They continue the war. Pero basta ako galit ako sa droga. Presidente ako o hindi, galit talaga ako sa inyo. Kaya we can continue this fight even if I am already a civilian. Mahirap itong Cebu na ito. Sabi ko, sisirain ang bayan ito. They will make the Philippine society dysfunctional. Kaya sabi ko, I'd be happy to see you dead than alive kayong mga drug lords. Yung basurero, the peddlers, ano na yan? Pero ako, galit talaga ako. Ba't ginawa mo yan sa bayan ko? Para na rin tinatapos ang buhay namin. So, gusto kong dapat malaman niya ng mga durugista. I will forever remain your enemy. Yan ang tandaan ninyo. Maraming salamat po.